Welcome back. Getting back on a 1970 Chevelle. In the last video I fit the door, and since then I put the handle in, put the striker in, and actually it fits real nice. Everything looks good. So before I start on the fender, let's take a look at that. Okay, I've put the handle on, I put the lock cylinder in, I got the striker in there, and actually this come out pretty good. The line in the door is just a hair higher than the quarter, and it's a little bit lower right here, but overall it looks pretty good. There's the primary latch, there's the secondary latch. So it shuts nice, it looks good, I'm happy with that. Let's get on the fender. Actually, it's got a pretty good gap. I'm going to get all my bolts started, and it's probably going to need some shims in it. Okay, I've got the bolt in behind the door. I've got the bolt here on top of the cowl, one down here that goes into the front of the cowl, and I got the bolts on the bottom of the fender. What I want to do in here is pry this up, get a shim underneath here, and get this fender picked up in here a little bit. Just snug it. Okay, this bolt that goes here below the hinge goes right into the cowl. That's the last one I want to mess with. It's got a gap back there. That's going to set the gap on the fender to the door, and I don't want to tighten that up. I want to get everything else where I want it. And then I want to pry this forward just a little bit, so I really got to force a shim in there so when I tighten it up, it doesn't want to push the fender back. But that'll be the last bolt I tighten. Okay, this fender is pushed tight to the door, and it also wants to stay in. So I'm going to pry this forward, snug this bolt up, and I want to pull this fender out so it doesn't scrape the door, because these two want to hit together. I want to concentrate on the top part of the fender, get this lined up before I mess with that. Okay, I had to take that bolt out of that top bracket on the fender behind the door. Gives me a little bit of room. Now I can shift this back a little bit. Okay, next, I want to add some shim to the bottom of this fender. I need to pull this down. This one I snugged up, so what I'm going to do is add some to the front, and then I'll snug that up, and then add some to the back. I've got this tool here. This is actually for exhaust systems, and I think this was for sliding in between exhaust pipes, give you a little bit more room. It's an old Blue Point GA84A. And I bought this years ago just for these old cars. Well, they weren't old at the time I was working on them. Slide this tool in between things and pry on it. Gives you some room to get the shims in there. There's two shims in there. I'm going to snug this one up, and then I'll loosen this up, get a couple back there. And just loosen that bolt up. I could see that fender drop down. Okay, by adding those two shims down there under each bolt, it actually dropped this down a little bit too far. So I'm going to remove one shim, and then I'll probably have to try and get my bolt in here and push this up. Seems like this fender has more of a crown to it than the door, so that's why it's going to need to be spread apart with shims on top, shims on the bottom to flatten this out some. Okay, I've got my shims in here, I've got a pretty wide gap, actually looks pretty good. This is evened up. Now the top of the fender is quite a bit lower than the door, being this is aftermarket. I'm gonna have to try and bend that up. But here's the issue. It's nice and flush up here, it's flush here, but it's still out right in this area. Even though it's got a wide gap, this door and fender almost touching when I open it. It's not actually touching, but it's close. By the time it's painted, it's going to be touching. So I'm going to have to figure out what I'm going to do with that. I might have to shift this fender forward, put even a bigger gap in there, but I'll figure something out. Okay, here's what I ended up doing. When I'm looking at this fender, it looked like that front was out. So I loosened up this front bolt here, pushed that back to get it more in line, and it gave me a little bit more gap here without changing anything else, so it's not hitting right now. It's a little wider than I like, and it still is out high here. I'm going to get everything kind of worked out as close as I can, and then if I have to, start moving it back a little bit at a time to see how I end up. These things are always very time consuming because you're always adding shims and bending and tweaking and moving it a little bit here and there. Next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to bend the back of this fender up to match the door. I don't want to put anything in here and just pry it up. It'd probably damage the door. I'm going to take the slide knocker, put it behind here and pop it up a little bit. Okay, that pulled it up pretty nice, but it's got a tight gap back here. It's tight here, it's wide here. Like I said, it's aftermarket. Okay, actually it doesn't look too bad. Still, it's got a little bit more of a crown right here. We're not hitting, I got plenty of gap right there. This pulled up, that lines up nice. And I got that bolt in there. What the issue was, I had the wrong bolt. The one that goes in the top of the fender is what I had in there, and it's got a lot bigger washer, so the washer was hitting on that outside edge of that bracket. There's really no more adjustment, but it lines up good. Last thing to do is get shims in that last bolt on the front of the cowl. Then I'll get some bolts in the core support, and I think this will be good. Okay, all the bolts are in. Overall, I'm pretty satisfied with this. It doesn't fit all that bad. Next thing, I'm going to get the bolts back in the hood hinge here, and then I'm going to start on the other side. I'm not going to video that unless I run into some catastrophe. And I hope that side goes as smooth-ish as this side did. So I'm done with this video. Thanks for watching.